Hello my friends, Jerry Rosa here in the Rosa String Works Workshop. Welcome to the North Pole region of the Rosa String Works company. Oh my gosh, is it cold here. It feels like I should be living at the North Pole in this deep valley. It's just darn cold. I mean, like every night it's down in the teens, and during the day it's getting up into the low 20s. And yeah, I know that's amateur status for some of you, because I know some of you live right next to Santa Claus up there at the North Pole. But yeah, down here in the middle of the Ozarks, this ain't supposed to be like this. Oh, have I ever cut a lot of firewood? It's just crazy. We've cut 2 big loads of firewood just in the last week. Fortunately, my brother's here in the shop. He helped me load it. And almost all of that's gone already. It's just barely enough to load the stove one more time, I think. So guess what I'll be doing tomorrow? Cutting more firewood. Anyway, enough about all my crying. We've got a good shop talk for you today, I think. If I can talk my brother into it, I'm going to have him show the status of his guitar a little bit later. And I've got... I don't know if you want to call it a rant or not, but I got a speech in my head sort of prepared. I don't have anything on paper, it's just all ad lib, but I want to talk more in detail about bridges, saddles, nuts, and bridge plates. And I think I have a different perspective to talk about today that maybe you haven't heard, and it may make more sense to some of you, and may help you out in determining how you want to go about setting up those areas of your guitars if you're building, especially if you're building a guitar or if you're repairing it. Last time we were together was 2 weeks ago, because last week I had that vertigo thing, and it was a fairly severe vertigo. It was the worst one I've had in quite a few years. When I had Meniere's disease in my left ear about 5 or 6 years ago, oh, yeah, unparalleled vertigo. The room would spin so fast that you just have to grab a hold of your chair because you felt like you were falling out of your chair. It was just horrible. So this one wasn't quite that bad, but it was bad enough that I really couldn't stand up and walk very well. Anyway, I did those exercises a bunch of times, and I realized that I was doing them too fast, number one, and I realized also that I did it, for the wrong side one time, and that made it even worse. Anyway, long story short, Monday I finally got that cleared up, and I really haven't had any trouble with it since Monday. Thank goodness. So I'm back in the shop working again. I've got a couple of things here to cover that were sent to me by viewers and customers, etc. But viewers in this case. Charlie McCormick sent me a nice note about his saddle. Now I get these all the time. I don't read them all. I very, very rarely read any of them, but I get a lot of these, and I just thought I'd mention this one. It was nicely written by Charlie McCormick. He says, "I want to thank you, Jerry. I got the saddle, put it on my mandolin, and wow, did it make a difference in the tone and the volume. You've got a great, great saddle. I'm telling everyone how much it improved my mandolin. Thank you so much." Well, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. Like I said, I get those letters all the time. I honestly, I know it's going to sound crazy, but I bet I have received more than 1,000 of those kinds of letters over the last 20 years or so. I mean, it's just nuts. James Cope sent me a note that I thought was pertinent. You heard me say that Alison Krauss is the finest voice in the whole world, especially female voice. There's just nothing that compares to it. I don't care what kind of music you like, Alison Krauss is the best singer in the whole world, period. You don't have there's no argument there. You don't have a leg to stand on to try to promote someone else, Allison's the best. It's just the way it is. You just have to accept it. Anyway, he sent me a link, and I put it in the description, that analyzes her voice. And when you watch that link and watch that analysis of her voice, you will obviously agree with me. Because that guy was pretty well taken by her voice once he analyzed it with his equipment. Yeah, anyway, that proves my point. I rest my case. Thank you, James, for sending me that. I found that very interesting. So the rest of you will too. You ought to check it out. Ron's status, my buddy that makes the deer antler mandolin saddles for me, comes in the shop and does that every once in a while. Well, you know, he had the COVID, and he is still recovering. He's doing better, but he's still on oxygen. How long has it been now? Almost 2 months, you know? I mean, wow. He's still on oxygen, no kidding. So, anyway, make a long story short, you know, he's improving, but it's sure taking a long time. I had one guy write to me and just got all over me because I was making that comparison between Ron not having the shots and myself having the shots, myself getting the infusion, etc. And he just got all over me, said people are dying all over the world because they're getting those shots, and you shouldn't be telling people to get those shots, etc. and so forth. And I told him that he and I would just have to disagree on that subject. You know, if people were dying all over the place, it would be all over the news, all over social media, it would be everywhere. That's not happening. Other than the people that have these theories, they're the flat earther type people. You know, they think everything's a conspiracy. They think everything is a... Do I think the government would lie? Do I think the government would conspire? Heck yes. But on this particular subject, do I really think that's what's going on? No, I do not think that's what's going on. Okay, enough said on that. My granddaughter Mary, I've been talking about her basketball prowess, and tonight is their district championship, and her team is the top seed. I don't know what their actual official record is. They've only lost 3 games in the whole season. 2 of those were to a team that's not even in their district, that was in tournaments. And it was the same team that beat them twice, but barely beat them both times. I mean, they almost won. So, you know, they're doing really well. They only got beat 1 time in the regular season, and believe it or not, that's the team they're playing tonight in their district championships. So, you know, it's going to be a good game one way or the other, and they'll either win or they'll lose, and, you know, we'll find out tonight. And I'm kind of excited about that one. It's going to be a fun game. We had a visitor last week that was here Tuesday evening through Thursday late afternoon. His name was Kim Warner. I just can't hardly say enough about this guy. He's from Australia, well, originally from Australia, and he's moving back to Australia. He's been in the United States now for the last 20 years or so, and he's just been gigging the whole time. I mean, in other words, playing music the whole time. And let me tell you something, this fellow's on another level. He is another Chris Thiele, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm not just using that term to impress you. This fellow's on that level. You can spot a true musician like that. And the first 5 notes he played on his instrument that he brought, I went, oh, I know who we're dealing with here. It was real obvious, very obvious. And we made some good video while he was here in the shop. And basically what he was doing was paying me to teach him how to do setups and things like that on instruments, because he's wanting to get into more of the luthery side of it when he moves back to Australia. And I think you're going to enjoy the videos when those finally make it to the screen, because they have to be edited and put out. But I think you'll enjoy it, and you'll enjoy seeing him play. Oh my gosh. And I would encourage you to look him up. His name is spelled K-Y-M Warner, W-A-R-N-E-R, and you can find him on, most of his videos on YouTube are older, but you can find him on Facebook, which with his current stuff, but you can find a lot on YouTube too. I mean, he's played with pretty much everybody you can think of. I think he's been nominated for Grammys, the whole bit. He's very, very, very good musician, so you should check him out. And I enjoyed spending time with him here. He was a real nice fellow. And I think he learned a lot. And as far as that all goes, for the rest of you, if there's anybody out there that just wants to come here and you know, do the same kind of thing, where I just kind of give you one-on-one direction on how to set up your instrument or whatever, you could bring your instrument and I'll let you do most of the work, and I'll give you the pointers, and if there's anything really hard, I'll do it, you know, whatever. And you know, if you just want to work one-on-one to learn more about that, we have the rental retreat. You can stay for a day or two. I have to charge my fee that I charge, so you know, and that is $125 an hour. So, but if you know, you pretty much get my full attention the whole time you're here. So it works out fairly well. He seemed to be very, very satisfied with it when he left. At least that's the impression I got. So I think he enjoyed it. Well, let's see. That brings me to my brother Scott's guitar, and let's see if he'll bring it over here and show it. It's kind of in the ugly duckling stage right now because he's got tape all over it. He's putting on binding, etc., and so forth. But he can come over and kind of tell you about it, what it's made out of, and that kind of stuff. And he's stalling right now. He's wanting me to beg him, you know. What's going on? You're stuck?
Finishing up a little spot.
He's stuck. Well, actually, he's not stuck. That's the problem. He's trying to stick his binding down with some tape, and it's not sticking, apparently. He's trying to make it pretty fancy. It's one of those that's going to need curb feelers when he's done. I'm going to make sure he wears a big hat with a long feather coming out of the back of it, too, when he plays it. Except that he won't be able to play it because it's a left-handed dreadnought.
Squirted a whole bunch of glue in here. I'm trying to get it all dried out.
It's never easy. It's just never easy. I tell you, it's not easy being me. And now you see why. All right, he's coming. I think he is actually coming. Oh, he's going to cough. Just okay, so tell him all about it.
If I can talk, I just choked. This is built for my son Joe. He's my youngest son. I promised this for his 21st birthday, and I'm only about 4 years late so
that's
far.
Not bad. That's not too bad.
I bought the wood on his birthday, put it that way. But it's made out of leopard wood on the back. Trying to get where you can see it.
You might have to come in closer, actually, with that camera.
Leopard wood on the back and sides. It's got a maple and Paduke binding. You can see a little peak of it there as you go around. And that was made by your AccuSlice guy.
Yeah, John Manura AccuSlice sent me that binding.
And I'm still in the process of putting the binding on the front. You really can't, here's a little spot, you can see it up here. I scraped this little section right here. This is a maple Paduke and maple sandwich next to abalone, and then the same edge binding. That's the best place to see the edge binding there. The neck is leopard wood, maple, walnut, maple, walnut, maple, and it runs typical to Jerry's design all the way through, laminated. What else? I've got abalone that I'm putting in here on the 3 rings, and I made an ebony pick guard, and it's going to be an ebony peg head cover. Still a long way to go.
It's going to be a nice one, though. One of the ways you can tell when they're going to be good is the pressure that comes out of them. And when you tap them like this, you can just feel the pressure coming out of the hole. Yeah, it'll be good. It's gonna have plenty of sound.
It's going to be the world's most expensive guitar as long as it's taking me to do it.
Well, you know,
I've been here a week. I came here Saturday. And,
So he's gotten that far in a week. That ain't bad.
I've been doing 12 to 14-hour days every day. This is Thursday or Friday now, I guess. So I have one more day tomorrow to work on it.
Welcome to my world. Anyway, it looks good. It's coming along, and he's finding, you know, all those little pitfalls that I talk about all the time. You know, there's all kinds of them. But he did finally admit I was a genius. Have you got that piece over there?
Your router base.
Yeah, he did finally admit I was a genius. I'll show you why. You can tell him.
Well, simplicity is hard to come by that works. And it's probably not simple to make, but it's a pretty simple jig. And this piece right here is what you run against the guitar, and you can adjust it depth-wise and height-wise to match your binding. And pretty easy to set up.
But anyway, I made this piece here to go on this Proxon bass, is what it amounts to. And it really does work really well.
For a guitar with all of the different jigs and apparatus that you can use to route the edging, nothing simpler and quicker than this. I was just able to buzz around it like it was basically nothing.
Yeah. It does work really well. And it works on anything that's relatively flat. Unfortunately, I'm doing the very same thing on this mandolin as we speak, and there ain't nothing flat. That's the problem. I can't use that on this. I mean, you could sort of kind of use it, but yeah, you'd kind of be taking a chance on a lot of cases. But I'm actually cutting all of this, for the most part, by hand. I do use this tool here, made by Stumac, which I highly altered. I'll show you the alterations on that also. And basically you can run that along the side there. I think you can see how you run it along the side, and it more or less does the same thing. It's got a cutter right there that cuts the slot. So the side binding is fairly easy to cut with this. Of course, when you get into these tight spots, you can't get this in there everywhere. Now, the modifications I made to this tool is, number one, I put a much longer piece here. I made this piece right here, and that way I've got something to hold on to. It's much easier to hold on to it, and I can keep that flat on the side of the mandolin. Now, it's good and bad. I'll admit that the fact that it's long like that, it actually lets more stuff get caught under it. Like there's a lot of sawdust that'll get caught under it. But it does keep me good and square, and you just have to clean it more, you know. But it works really well. The second thing I altered on this was I cut off these wings. This thing had these wings that stuck way out, and that would stop you. Like when you get up to a corner like this, that would stop you like, you know, a quarter inch away, further away than it does now that I've cut all those off. So I cut the wings off on both sides here with my milling machine. And so this works way better now, at least in my mind, than it did when I bought it. But I did get that from Stumac. So, by the way, while I've got the router in my hand, I wasn't planning to talk about this, but it might as well. This Dremel is a powerful one. It's a 4000. I think they make a couple even bigger than this, but this is a Dremel 4000. This one is all you need for instruments. It really is. This sucker does everything you need, and it's got all the power you will ever need, and it's a little bit heavy, but for me, with my big hands, it's perfect for me. This particular little tool is cheaper, and it's made exactly like it. This one came from Menards. It's the Master Force. It claims, you know, it has the same claims as this. It's way cheaper, but I got to be honest. If I called this a 10, I'm just saying, if I call this a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, then this is about a 7.5. I mean, it's pretty good, but it's not as powerful as this. It doesn't spin as fast as this, even though it says it does. You can tell it doesn't. So, I mean, this is a pretty good alternative, though. I'm not knocking it too much. I'm just trying to tell you that if you wanted a cheap alternative to this Dremel 4000, you could go to like Menards, or maybe another box store has an equivalent to this. This is, both of them claim 35,000 RPM. You can tell this one spins up a lot faster than this one does when you're using them. So anyway, I thought I'd point that out in case you wanted to, you know, get a pretty decent one. I have no real complaints about this. I'm just telling you that it's not quite as good as this one. But it is a lot cheaper. Just ad-libbing a few things here. Here's another thing. This taper gauge, I still get people asking every time, every day about this thing. I know there's new people every day that watch the videos, so they're all wondering where this came from. Again, this is the gauge that I use to set the action at the 12th fret. You can use it at the 1st fret too, but I find it's better at the 12th fret for me. And it ranges from 10 thousandths to 150 thousandths. It's a machinist taper gauge. If you want to write it down, here's the brand name. It's called Insize, I-N-S-I-Z-E, and the number is 4630-1E. 4630-1E. And you can get them off of eBay or probably Amazon. I haven't even looked at Amazon, but they're probably there too. And quite honestly, they're not cheap. They're like $66 or in that neighborhood, or maybe more. But for me, you know, they're worth their weight in gold. I mean, they truly are. This thing just changed everything when I started using that. It makes it so much easier. You know, you can do feeler gauges and all that kind of crud, but that's a real pain in the neck. This thing here, you just stick it in and you know what it is instantly. So there you go. Where am I at on my list here? I've got my list, so let me look and see where I'm at. Okay, shop project update. Jake Jacobs guitar. It's the one you saw me do that little inlay spot where I did the truss rod cover. That was a separate video. I got his whole guitar finished, and it's on its way back to the family. So that turned out really well. And you'll see videos on that down the road too. The status of this mandolin that I'm building, I finally got off of zero, I guess you'd say, because it's been sitting for a couple of weeks now without me touching it. And so I did start, you know, cutting the binding. I've got the binding slot cut around the whole top here now, and then all of this part from about here up, you have to do all by hand. You have to do a lot of hand work in the corners and things. And now I'm actually cutting the binding slots on the top. Can you see there's a binding slot on the top? And what I plan to do is similar to him. I'm going to kind of pimp it out. I'm going to be putting abalone shell around the top, and it'll have a purfling, an abalone shell purfling, and then the actual binding on the outside. And the binding on the outside is going to be curly maple if I can manage it. It's actually curly maple, walnut, and sycamore. It's 3 layers on the outside, and it's going to be tough. I'm hoping I can bend it on these sharp bends. Boy, you talk about a glutton for punishment. You really don't know until you try to bend curly maple that tight. Oh my gosh. We'll see if it works. Okay, I guess it's time. I see a lot of questions popping up, and I see somebody just did a super chat. Thank you, Mr. Mask. Thank you very much. I see a lot of questions. We'll have to come back to those in a minute. I want to, before we get into the questions, I wanted to talk to you about, you know, what the title says here. Bridges, plates, nuts, and saddles. And just you've heard all of this before if you've watched my videos. But I think I have a new take on some of it that might make more sense to a few of you, that you'll go, oh, I see what you're talking about, that kind of thing. I've said before that your money is spent down at the bridge area. That's where you want to spend your money. Up at the nut area, not so much. The nut is really important, but it's only important in terms of looks, number one, and number two, the playability. I mean, so, you know, it can affect the looks of the instrument. If it's not done well, it can look horrible. And it can be broken and those kinds of things. You know, all that aside, but the main two things about the nut are the looks of it and the playability. And of course, the playability is the most important part of that. So it can really affect how well the instrument plays. But what I'm trying to get across is, if the playability is okay, if you're good with that, then don't spend your money down there changing out the nut just because you think you want to try a tusk nut, or you want to try a bone nut, or you want to try, you know, some other kind of nut. You're not going to have much effect on the sound of your instrument by doing that. If you want to affect the sound of your instrument, go to the other end of the strings and get down there at your bridge and your saddle and your plate. Now, let's back up the truck for just a second and think about this. There's only two things. This is not rocket science at all. There's only two things that make really sound on your instrument. One of them are the steel strings, and the other one is the wood. And if all you're hearing, like on a mandolin is a good example of this, because lots of mandolins are really tinny. All you hear is the metal strings. You don't hear the wood vibrating. And if all you're hearing is the metal strings, it's going to sound tinny, thin, high-pitched, you know, metallic sounding. If you can get the wood to vibrate, then you're going to hear more of a blend. You're going to hear a woody vibration there. The metal is going to blend into the wood. That's exactly what I want to talk about in terms of the concept. It's the blending. So what is another name for a saddle? And I thought about this, and it's so true. It may sound like I'm just trying to be cute or coy or something, but honestly, your saddle ought to be called a blender. That's really what it ought to be called. Think about it in these terms. Your saddle, you know, it's what sends the sound down into your instrument. Okay, your strings are riding on that saddle, and it's actually transferring that sound down there. Lots of people say, well, I would like to try aluminum, or I'd like to try a brass saddle, or I'd like to try this. Well, think about that. In logical, common sense terms, there's no blending there. You got metal going to metal straight into the top. You're just transferring that metal sound right down into your top. That's why it will sound harsh. I never thought about it in these terms myself. I just knew people, they'd ask me and I'd say, well, I've tried it, and I'm telling you, metal sounds really harsh on your saddle. Why does it sound harsh? Because it's not blending. It's sending the full force of that steel right into your top. So what is a good blendable saddle? What would be good? Well, if you use, let's just take a different example. Let's say you used a maple saddle. Well, maple's not exactly the best sound transfer wood, really. And so you're going to get a lot of muddy sound coming through something that's a softer wood like that. Or if you really picked a soft wood, like say a spruce saddle, would be a real good example. Even though your top is spruce, and you would think, well, that's got to be a good saddle choice, it wouldn't, because it's mushy, it's spongy, it's soft, and it's not going to send those string vibrations hard enough or firm enough into your top. You don't want all those vibrations to get into your top, because it's going to sound harsh, like if you put the metal saddle back in there again. That wouldn't be good. So you got to find that blender. You got to find that saddle that blends those vibrations, that metal sound down to your wood sound. So we know plastic, you know what that sounds like. And there are various grades of plastic. I mean, Tusk is one grade of plastic, which is a much, much better grade of plastic. Micarta is a much better grade of plastic. Those are very, very hard plastics. You know, you drop them on concrete and you can hear them click and pop and make all kinds of sounds. You drop a different kind of plastic on the concrete and it just kind of goes like nothing, you know, like there's nothing there. Okay, so if you're using a really good grade of plastic, then you're starting at least towards a really good blending tool there. My opinion is, why do I want to use plastic when there are better options? And the better options are bone, and in my case, I use antler. Now, you might say, well, antler, you know, because I use Antler, you may think that I think Antler is the best and there's nothing better. In my opinion, bone and antler are pretty much equal. I mean, they're almost, I can't honestly, in a blind test, I'd never know if you were playing bone or if you were playing antler. I wouldn't know. Here's my thoughts on that. The reason I use antler is because, very simply, first of all, it's available. Second of all, it's dried and usable instantly. In other words, when it comes off the animal, the deer or the elk, or even the moose, when it comes off of them, it's basically ready to use right there. Bone, not necessarily. I mean, if the bone's been out exposed to the weather for months, it's probably ready to use. But if the bone's fresh, came right out of the animal, yeah, not so much. It's going to be kind of wet. It's going to be kind of smelly. You know, so that's the main reason I use antlers, because antlers just instantly ready to use. You know, there are videos on YouTube about how to prepare bone to be used, and some of it you boil. I mean, I don't know. I haven't done any of that. I just don't use it, therefore I don't know all of that. But you can look that up. So, but in my opinion, bone and antler are very, very similar material. I personally think antler is probably a little bit harder. I've never done any studies to prove this, but I would think that it makes sense that antler would be a little bit harder because they use it to fight with, and it's got to be a very strong bone. You see those animals crashing together. There's a lot of force there. So in my opinion, the antler is probably about the strongest bone out there, and therefore it's good and hard, and it transfers the sound really well. Now, again, bone I think is equal. I don't really think you're going to find much difference in sound transfer there. But that's the reason I use antler. So in my opinion, that's the way you probably should be thinking about your saddle from now on, is it's a blender. Okay, now we can extend that further to your bridge, and you can extend that to your bridge plate underneath it. And it's really the same thing. You know, I hate to use Gibson as the example, but we all know what they've done. They've put plywood bridge plates, they've put, you know, softwood bridge plates, they've just done all kinds of goofy stuff. And it doesn't blend, it doesn't transfer the sound into your top very well. You know, I prefer, and Martin, you see Martin do this all the time, I prefer a hardwood bridge plate. I prefer, like Padauk is a really good one. If you can take a little tiny piece of wood, that small, bridge plate material, and tap on it, and you can hear a note or a click, a real sound coming out of it, it's probably a good bridge plate material. I use the Padauk mainly because I have it, you know, because I have a lot of scrap Padauk because of building those guitars out of Padauk. But I'm sure Rosewood would be very good. I'm sure many of other types of woods would be fine. You know, the hard exotic woods, like Scotch using his leopard wood. That's very hard, very dense wood. By the way, that leopard wood, you better have really strong, hard hands, or you're going to have to wear gloves the whole time you work with it, because it's the splinteriest wood I've ever seen in my life. And I know he would agree with that. We've both been picking splinters. It's just crazy how many splinters you get from that leopard wood. So before you run out and buy leopard wood, you ought to know that, because it really, truly is hard to deal with. And I'm not just saying it. It's in a different class all its own when it comes to the splinters. Anyway, the point is that the bridge plate should be a very good material. It should not be some piece of junk material. That's not the place to shortcut your instrument. Same way with the actual bridge. You know, your bridge too. It's all of those three things, your saddle, your bridge, and your bridge plate, are your blender. That's where you're getting that metal sound transferred to the wood sound. I hope that makes sense to you. I hope that concept maybe sinks in a little bit better as a blender versus just the fact that it's a saddle. It really does blend your sound. That's where it comes from. Okay, off the horse. Some of you are going, wow, it's about time. All right, let me scroll up here and see if I can find some of those first questions, because I saw a bunch of them going up the screen in a hurry. And it looks like I see the first one here from perhaps Peter Bryan. In the world's best mandolin, did you choose the deeper tone board as the bass side of the top? That's a really good question. Or does it even matter? Well, you know, Peter, had I discovered this a lot earlier in my career, I would tell you exactly the answer to your question. But as I truly only discovered that on this mandolin, I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I would love to see somebody do some sort of testing and, you know, analysis of that. It probably won't be me at this late stage of my career. But it's a really good question, Peter, and I would like to know the answer to it myself. And to be truthful, when I noticed the difference, I didn't think about putting the deeper side on the bass side. Probably, I mean, here's a different way to think about it. Most of the time when I have something like that, I prefer to put the bassier stuff on the treble side because it basins down the trebly sound. So there's another way to think about it. Yeah, I would like to see somebody do an analysis on that down the road, but truly, all 5 pieces were like that. The one side had one sound, the other side had a different sound. One was low, one was high. Every single time. I don't think that was coincidental. Okay, the next question. Yeah, Jason is asking, is Scott the same brother that has one of your guitars? Yes, he is. He's also a much better musician than me. I won't say
smarter too.
He said a lot smarter too. Not true. Not true at all. Okay, let's see.
Definitely better looking.
Better looking. Yeah, right. Okay. You know how brothers are. You have to fight. You can't get along. It's just a law. Aletha Chris says, how many siblings in your family do you have, Jerry? And who is the elder? And do they all play music and build instruments? Well, the answer to that is there's 4 of us. I am the oldest. Scott is the youngest boy. There were 3 boys first. So it's Jerry, Steve is the middle boy, and then Scott is the younger. And Steve is a master grade carpenter. I mean, like, I seriously don't know anybody that's better carpenter than my brother Steve. And I'm not just saying it. That the man, he's just an amazing carpenter, and he can build a house by himself just about as fast as a crew of guys can build a house. I mean, it's just amazing. You would have to watch him to believe it. Scott, on the other hand, was the black sheep of the family. He doesn't do anything. Actually, what do you do, Scott, exactly?
Construction manager.
Huh?
Construction manager.
He's a construction manager for a kitchen and bathroom remodeling company for the most part.
Yeah.
That's mostly what they do. And, you know, he's pretty good too. He's just really picky. And then my sister, Angie, is, she's got 2 kids and works, well, I don't know. She now has they have their own business. They have a concrete business, and she kind of manages that, doesn't she, the office?
Yeah, huge business.
Yeah, it's a huge concrete business, by the way, and she manages the office of that. She used to be in insurance before that. But anyway, her husband, Calvin, they're doing really well in their concrete business. It's a huge business in the St. Louis County area. Okay, well, let's see here. We also got another super chat from Andrew Keppel. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Moving on to the next question. Clyde Lewis, really enjoyed your DIY bridge heater video. Do you sell plans on how to make one? Well, no, Clyde, just the videos that are on my website. There's, I think, 2 or 3 linked on my website. I don't know if that's where you went to find it, but if you watch all 3 of those videos, or however many there are, I can't remember, to be honest. If you watch all those, it ought to give you enough information, I think, to build one. Because there are at least 3 videos, I'm pretty sure. And they should all be linked on the website, rosastringworks.com, and then there's a tab at the top, talks about the side bender or bridge heater. Really the side bender and the bridge heater are basically exactly the same technology. So there's really very little difference. Going down through here again, Andrew asks, good morning, how long do you let your True Oil finish cure harden before you start adding hardware and doing your setup? Actually, the True Oil hardens up pretty quick. I would say 3 or 4 days max. You don't really have to let it go much more than that, or at least that's kind of what I do. 3 or 4 days seems to be good enough. Most finishes, I think the trick, Andrew, to most of the finishes, at least that I deal with for instruments, is that the longer they dry, the more they shrink, and that's why you need to wait, is to see how much they shrunk. Did the pores come back, and or is the fill good, or so that's the reason you need to wait more for the drying almost than any other reason. It's just because they shrink so much. John Telford asks, good source for inlay supplies. Well, John, I used to have, I thought, some good sources. Most of those are gone. Mostly I just buy from Stu Mac anymore, or LMI, Luthier Mercantile, out there in California. What did you say, Scott?
It's DePaul Supply.
DePaul?
DePaul Supply. It's I think it's luthier.com, I think.
Luthier.com, he said?
I'm not sure about that, but it's DePaul.
I don't spend much time looking for that stuff anymore. For one thing, I got a bunch of it. I bought a bunch of it a long time ago, so I got a whole bunch of it in drawers. And for the most part, I don't.
Abalone, they have anything and everything, every pattern already pre-made for you.
Who is it again? DePaul?
DePaul Supply.
How do you spell it? DEPAUL?
Yeah, and with the E at the end.
With an E at the end, he said DEPAULE,
Yeah.
Supply. And he said luthier.com?
I think it was. It's been a long time since I've been on it.
It's been a while since he was on it, he said. So anyway, that might be another source. He said they had a lot of stuff. So to be honest, I just don't go out and look for it, because for the most part, I make it myself, and I'm not buying it pre-made for the most part. Let's see. It scrolled on me here. I lost my place, so bear with me for a second. Okay, I think I found where I'm at. Aletha asks another question. Fiddles only have a bridge and a nut. On the other hand, where is the blending there? Well, okay, yeah, good point. It's a little different technology with a fiddle. Fiddles are different than the other instruments. And you could even argue that the mandolin is a little bit different technology. Every instrument is a little different. I mean, a banjo, etc. But my point is, on a fiddle, it's pretty significantly different. The main difference on a fiddle is that you got that bow that makes that long vibrating note. On a fiddle, or on a guitar or mandolin, you're plucking a string and it's just a quick thing. But on a violin, you got that long thing to send that blend of that sound down through that bridge, down into your top, and vibrate that whole instrument. I say all the time that I don't think maple is your best sounding instrument wood. I've heard some really good maple instruments, some really good maple guitars. The guy up in Canada that I visited a year or so ago with Victor, I should remember these names, and I'm horrible at it, but Victor's relative or friend, I can't remember which, he built some wonderful maple guitars. Sounded really good. There was one I had in the shop. As a matter of fact, we already released the video. Well, let me rephrase that. I've already uploaded a video that I will release this evening. It was a maple guitar. Had a pretty darn good sound. but overall, I don't think maple is your best sounding wood. The difference is on a violin, why they use the maple is because it's a good blending wood when you start bowing it like this. It transfers that vibration from down into that top, and then that whole instrument is vibrating. So it's a different technology more than it is the thing that's blending it. It's the bow, if you really want to get down to it, that's kind of doing your blending because of that long note. At least that's my take on it. That's the way I would define it. But then again, you still want quality wood there. I mean, like on your bridges and things, there's a big difference between classes of violin bridges. Some of them are very, very plain, and they're not as hard. You get those really well-made violin bridges. You can just tell just by looking at it. You can go, oh yeah, that's a good one. You can just tell it's the quality of the wood. Maybe one of these days I'll have to kind of show you something on that and compare them and show you what's good and what's not so good. But anyway, that's a good question. But it's mostly a different technology. Is probably the biggest difference in the blending on that. Okay, here's one that I'm just more intrigued. It doesn't have question marks. Staley is saying something. Cowhorn is essentially hair, so it isn't hard enough, I don't think. Good point, Staley. That's right. See, buffalo horn and cow horn and things like that, they really are basically a matted hair. That's really what it is. It's not bone. Antler is, I guess, technically bone. I mean, there's people smarter than me out there that know better, but at least I would call it bone because it literally is growing right out of the skull. And, so antler is different. The bone, horn, anytime you hear it referred to as horn versus antler or versus, well, I guess that's really it, antler. I'm trying to think, is there another word for antler? But anyway, antler is bone and horn is hair. I mean, that's really true. Having said that, I do find one really good application for horn in music, and that is making picks out of the horn. It makes great picks. Now, it will get a feather edge because of that hair. That's like, you can tell it's hair when you start, like if you took a knife or a chisel or something and tried to break it apart, you'll see the little fibers in there. It's basically just matted hair. So that's the difference between horn and antler. And one's bone, one's hair. That's really the truth. So that's a good point, a good observation there, Staley. Yeah, Gary says the horn has more of a muting effect. Yeah, it really does. But that's why I think it's a cool pick. It kind of tones down some of that metallic sound of your string. If you're hearing, some of you out there that are maybe trying to figure out how to get rid of some of that metallic sound, try a horn pick. You may have to make it, but try a horn pick. You can buy a buffalo horn that's compressed in little blocks and things from different supply houses. One place I used to get it from, I think, was called Jantz, Jantz, I think. They may not even be in existence anymore. But anyway, my point is, it does make good picks. My guitar player I used to have in my band years ago, he didn't want to use anything but a horn pick after I made him the first one. He really loved them. I made him a bunch of them. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question here. Jeffrey Shu says, why can't you shim a fretboard on a guitar instead of neck reset, messing up the old finish? I have seen it done on violins. Yeah, you sort of kind of can, but most of the time it's the opposite way. On a guitar, most of the time, like, I don't know, it's hard to, if this is the body, then the neck is usually like this, and so shimming it, you can't really shim it, because the neck's usually pulled up on the end, and therefore you need to pull it down, and there's nothing to shim, you know. And if you did try to shim the opposite way, you'd be way above the top of your guitar. So you can't shim it most of the time on a guitar. But also, the video that I'm going to, please, with that question, please watch the video that I will release later today. The guy came in and he really wanted a neck reset. Well, honestly, his guitar didn't need a neck reset at all. I mean, didn't need it at all, in my opinion. So watch that video tonight, and again, I've been on that high horse a million times, that so many people do neck resets when they need to fix a different problem, you know. And his was really simple compared to the one you're going to see tonight. But I also think the video you're going to see tonight is a real good in-depth explanation of setup on an instrument. So I think it's a really good one for setup. Even though you've seen it before, I think this one is a really good one. And I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah, neck resets just are not a good thing. And maybe while we're on the neck reset thing there, related to it, not so much about neck resets at this point, but kind of related, is that you need to look at your instrument with a critical eye. You need to look at it with a critical eye, and you go, okay, here's my line, the top is going like this. Now all of a sudden when I get past the bridge is, you know, the top is bulging up, or maybe in front of the bridge, it's sunken down. If you see things that aren't in line, there's a problem. Now, every problem has a reason for the problem. You know, it might be kind of like old age, you know, and you may be dying of natural causes. There's not a whole lot you can do about some of those kinds of problems. But most problems have something you can do with them. For instance, going back to Kim Warner, I was telling you about how he was here last week. He brought in a bazooki, and that's what we actually did the setup on. We did a new nut, a new bridge, a new saddle. But when what I know about a bazooki, folks, I know a lot more about a bazooka than I know about a bazooki, and I know nothing about a bazooka. So that'll tell you what I know about a bazooki. I know that much about a bazooki, okay? But the instant he put it in my hand, I went, something ain't right here. And he's going, like, what? You know, he didn't notice this on his own instrument. But the instant I had it, I went, there's something wrong here. And I pointed it out to him. And I showed him that it was sunk in front of the bridge. I said, there's a reason for that. And I said, we need to look at it. You know, because he was really just wanting to focus on fixing, you know, putting a new bridge and a new saddle and a new nut. And he wanted to learn how to do those things. That was the reason he brought it. I said, well, there's a different problem we need to fix first, you know. So sure enough, we took the strings off of it, and I looked inside, and you know how there's an X brace? Well, on the back side, you know, like the front, like this is the sound hole, so these are the front of the X braces here. Behind here, one of these had been cut behind the X. One of them had been cut like with a razor saw, and it was real obvious it had been sawn, because wood doesn't break perfectly straight, and you know. And anyway, that had broken, and then it had split the brace down. Because it had broken there, it had split the brace, and that allowed that front to sink down. So that was the first thing we had to fix on his bazooki, and we fixed it. By the way, all this will come out in a video down the road, but I'm just trying to point out to you, look at your instrument with a critical eye. That will tell you more whether you need a neck reset or not, because there will, you know, I've said it so many times, and the neck reset's the one that bugs me the most, because everybody thinks their instrument needs a neck reset. Think about it like this. First of all, Martin and Gibson know how to put a neck in a guitar. Rarely do you ever see it put in wrong. I mean, like, rarely, never. When you need a neck reset, there should be a problem with the neck area. Like if you see the neck heel pulling out, it's loose. If the neck's loose, you need a neck reset. No question about it, I agree with you 100%. But if the neck is tight in that block, it may not need a neck reset. It may need something else, you know, something like, just like on this Bazooki, you know, that tips down like that, and therefore the strings are much higher, and it looks like it needs a neck reset, and it doesn't. You know, so look at it with a critical eye. Before you go to have somebody put a neck reset on it, like I told you before, there's a guy up in the St. Louis area, I'm not going to mention any names, he makes his living doing neck resets. That's all he does. He's got them lined up all the way around his shop. And I would bet you, if I was in that shop, I would bet you, I would tell you, 80% of them don't need a neck reset. That's, you know, because I'd fix the real problem instead of resetting the neck to make the strings level. You got to fix the other problem, and then your strings will automatically be level. You don't have to change the neck. Unless that neck comes loose in that block, there's a good chance it doesn't need a neck reset. Having said that, I obviously know some instruments need a neck reset, and I do. You've seen me do them. But it's when I do a neck reset, that instrument needed a neck reset, I guarantee you. Sorry I got on that high horse again, but man, I'm seriously telling you, that's the one single thing that everybody does, yeah, too much of. Way too much of. Okay, let's see here. How are the hands? Yeah, not good at all. In fact, I have to tell you that the Meloxicam is barely making any difference anymore. I ran out of the Meloxicam for about 4 days, and in the past, whenever I would run out of it, it was real obvious. The pain would start hurting. Honestly, the pain didn't change much. It was already hurting, and it kind of just kept hurting, and maybe got a little bit worse, but it didn't get much worse. So the Meloxicam's not doing much at this point. Jesse, my buddy Jesse down in Texas, I think. Sorry, Jesse, I can't remember nothing. Why do all instrument makers keep all those little pieces of scrap wood? I've got a pile of it. Yeah, Jesse, I don't have that problem. You don't see any wood piled up back here. I don't have that problem. I don't know where you got that problem, Jesse. No, you know, it's for me on repair, you'd be surprised how often I go get the little scrap of wood to fix a problem. For me, you know, that's going to be my excuse, is because I do so much repair. I need all kinds of little tiny pieces to fix all kinds of little tiny problems. But no, you know, everybody does that. That builds instruments. Man, you save every little precious piece, and I think kind of rightfully so. You will be surprised how often you will use it, especially if you get into the repairs. Does Rosewood take longer to loosen up than Mahogany? I have two Larrabee guitars that are nearly identical except the back and side materials. The Rosewood example has taken so much longer to sound okay. Well, no, I don't know that I'd go there with that. I don't think I could agree with that. Do I have a strong opinion on it, one way or the other? Not really. But I would think there might be other factors. I would think there might be factors like the finish, the kind of finish. Maybe they are the same, maybe they aren't. I don't know, you know. Do they have a different sound? Certainly, absolutely, no question. Rosewood has different sound than the what was the other one? I forgot now already. I know Mahogany. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Mahogany, though I really do like the sound of a lot of the Mahogany guitars. But I'm still not a huge fan of it. I prefer that crisper sound, the punchier sound that I think you get out of Rosewood. I don't know. They both have their qualities. Trying to read the next one here. I think I lost my place again. I did. Scroll back up. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it again. Having trouble this time. TX Crafts 1, Jerry, what tools, machines are must-haves for someone wanting to get serious for lutherie? Well, that's really a wide open question. It really is. It's hard to answer. Maybe I ought to do a shop talk just on that, maybe. I've kind of touched on it a bunch of different times, even in the shop talks. But, me personally, I think you got to have a bandsaw. I just don't hardly see how you could do luthier without it. Yeah, you can definitely do it all with a coping saw or with a hand saw. You can do that. But in this modern day, and if you want to be practical, I think you need a bandsaw. Do you need a real big bandsaw? Not necessarily, unless you want to build instruments from scratch, and then you probably will want a pretty good size one because you'll be resawing a lot of lumber to cut thin strips out of tall boards, 8-inch wide boards. You'll be resawing those. So you may need a pretty powerful, pretty decent sized bandsaw if you want to do that. Otherwise, if you're just doing repair and miscellaneous work and maybe building with pre-cut sides and things, then you probably don't need that big of a bandsaw. But bandsaws are so helpful. There's just so many things you can do with them. Now, some people might say, well, they would prefer to use a scroll saw. Me personally, I can't get along with a scroll saw very well. I don't have the patience to drill a hole and poke that wire up through there and connect it back up and saw. I just don't have that patience. Now, granted, you can't even do that with a bandsaw. But that's probably the only real advantage of a scroll saw for me is that one feature, and the rest of it doesn't do much for me because it's that constant bouncing up and down, and when you get into real tiny pieces, they like to, break, I think. At least that's been my experience. Now, there are plenty of people out there that are going to argue with me on that, on the scroll saw, and I apologize. I don't mean to offend you. I'm not a scroll saw person. So to me, it's the bandsaw. So that's probably my first main tool. And for me personally, my second main tool is that sander there that I made. And I know that's a cop-out because not everybody's going to get one of those because you have to make it if you want one of those. But that thickness sander, I can't do anything without using that thing. I mean, I use it all the time. Then if you get into hand tools, then to me, the absolute most important hand tool is this one. This little finger plane. I can't hardly do anything without using that. So those are the important ones to me. And then learning how to use a scraper is super important because scraping there's just almost no other way to do it sometimes. I mean, you can sand anything, of course, but the scraper blends, again, that word blending, you can blend so good with a scraper and you can do it so much faster and cleaner. I don't know. If you're talking about building, those are the tools for building, in my opinion, that you almost got to have. A drill press is very handy, but there's so many different takes on it and so many different ways to do everything. And other people would think other tools are more important than the ones I just told you. So it's really hard to say, and I don't know. I'm going to drop it at that point right there because it's like a no-win situation. Steve Royer sent me a super chat. Thank you. Oh, Steve says it's been a long time since he's seen a live stream, so have coffee. The next question here. Have you reported the poachers in the helicopter? I don't think they were poachers exactly. No, and we didn't report it, but we did try to check it out. It was hard to find any details about it. Although, everybody claimed that didn't happen around here, but it did, number one, because I saw it, and number two, and heard it, by the way, and number two, I don't know if it was in a conservation or some recent news article, something. My wife or somebody showed it to me where they were doing it further west in Missouri and doing the exact same thing. And so I know that that's what happened here. I don't think it was poachers, though. Joe McGraw says, I have the Dremel 4000 with a lot of attachments, haven't used it yet and never used a Dremel. What is a good way to practice using it? Well, Joe, I'm not so sure I know how to tell you about that exactly. I think I just learned on the fly. When I built that very first instrument, I learned how to use my Dremel, and I've been using it ever since. And that was like 40 years ago. So, yeah, I just use it a lot. I really do. Me, you know, like for instance, this one came, and I have a bunch of these. And as a matter of fact, I even have a dedicated one. The one with the cable that comes off of it, so you have a little wand in your hand, and this thing kind of sits stationary, and then you're using the cable attachment. This came with that. A lot of people prefer to use that because it's smaller. You can hold it in your hand, and it's got a rotating wire through that cable, and it connects back to that motor. I'm not good with that. I don't like those. They to me, the whole cable thing just moving around bugs the heck out of me. I've got big hands. I like to hold this like a pencil, and I use it like that. To do most everything I do, I kind of hold it like that. And I just, you know, the other thing about using a Dremel like this, if you're going to do it freehand, is always get your hand locked someplace. Yeah, try to find where the camera is. Right there. Like you lock it right here. You hold this locked on your, you know, like put the neck on the table here, and then do this. And so I got my hand really stable. You know, like the hand is laying on the table here. It can't really move, and I can just direct it with my fingertips then. So you want to be as stable as you can be when you use it. And the bigger your cutter, the more it's going to grab and jump and bounce. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I don't know how to tell you to practice with it. I just jumped in and started using it. So good luck to you. See, the next thing here, we're about out of time, I think. I'll take one more good question here if we can find one here. Yeah, Dennis made the comment about the sound post blending, and I meant to say that too, Dennis. So yeah, good point. Thanks for catching me. The sound post on a violin is part of your blend. Yes, that's what helps get that sound transferred to the back. The bow is part of it, and the sound post helps transfer that down to the back. So yes, that is part of your blend. I agree with you. Clyde says, what is your opinion on the combined spindle and belt sanders? Are there definite advantage or drawbacks? You know, I have one over there, Clyde, and I haven't really got the space in this shop to dedicate a place to use it, and I don't hardly ever use it. I have a dedicated spindle sander, and I kind of use that. That one over there is a spindle and a what did you call it? Like a belt sander. Yeah, it's a spindle sander and a belt sander, and it oscillates. That one over there, and it works good. But if you can afford a regular dedicated belt sander and a regular dedicated spindle sander, I would go that route because you don't have to spend time changing them out. The one I have that's a combo, I think it would be perfect. And if you could only afford one, that would be a good one. The one I have is a Triton, I think. Is that what it says, Triton?
Yeah.
So, and I just honestly haven't used it much. But I think if you can afford the specific tool, you're better off versus combo tools. And I'll give you another good example of that. I have a combination milling machine and metal lathe. It's great for a little farm and a hobby type situation. It's great. Do I wish I had a separate milling machine and a separate lathe? Yeah, kind of do. So I think anytime you combine the two machines into one, you kind of give up a little bit, and you always spend a lot of time switching from one to the other. I'm going to let that go for today. Thank you so much for joining me. There was over 200 folks, 217 it looks like, and I wish you a good rest of the day, and I hope you'll watch my video tonight when I turn it loose. As a matter of fact, I may turn it loose earlier. I may turn it loose this afternoon. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a good video on some setup, and I think it gives you a little different perspective on the setup again versus a neck reset, for instance, which the person felt he pretty much was insistent he needed. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week, same time, same channel.